Okay, so hello everybody. My name is Aston Vickery. I'm a Marakidva for Oasis Domestic Abuse Service, and I'll be moderating this webinar today. So I just wanted to say a massive welcome to everybody. This event, Phoenix, a psychoeducational group work programme for Kent, is part of 16 days of action to end gender-based violence. Kent Integrated Domestic Abuse Service has 16 events running between now and the 10th of December, aimed to inform, educate, and inspire action so that we can make domestic abuse everybody's business. Because domestic abuse is everybody's business and everybody can make a difference, which is exactly what you guys are doing by attending here today, so thank you. During this event, you are able to use the Q&A text box that you can see on your screen in which to ask questions for our speaker, Iona. As a moderator, I will publish these questions and I'll ask them at the end of the session. Iona will be speaking for approximately 30 minutes, and then we'll have approximately 30 minutes for the question. I just want to note that your email confirmation will show a slightly longer time for the webinar, and that's just so none of us get cut off. You can use the thumbs up, which you can see just underneath your questions, to upvote something if it's something that you would like to ask too. If you would like to follow up on a question, please preface the questions with the word follow up. My last bit of housekeeping is just to let you know that the new and improved Kent Domestic Abuse website has popped up on your screen. You can use this to find out about your local services and where to go for help. If you don't want to see that right now, just simply click the little X in the corner of the screen on your pop-up, and we'll put this up again at the end of the session. So that just leaves me the job of introducing Iona Hunter-Whitehouse. Iona is a Senior Project Development Officer for Oasis Domestic Abuse Service. She works to advance organisational practice and develop new programmes to ensure that victims of domestic abuse get services that really respond to their needs. Iona believes that charities can make a massive difference to the people that they support, and the way that we design and learn from the programmes we run makes realising this potential possible. Iona has worked within Oasis for 6 years, and during this time has worked in fundraising, impact management and project development. Iona has led on the development of the Phoenix Groupwork Toolkit, is a licensed Phoenix facilitator and also trains in domestic abuse risk and safety. Iona holds a degree in British politics and legislative studies and is also working towards a master's in voluntary sector manager. She is an all-round good egg. So Iona, over to you.
Thank you, Aston. It's very hard to know how to round off a bio of yourself, and I thought no one's ever directly told me that I'm not a good egg, and therefore that's what I went with. Thank you for that. So this is going to be an introduction to Phoenix. Phoenix is a 10-week educational support group for people who've experienced domestic abuse. So that could be whether you're experiencing domestic abuse currently, or whether that domestic abuse is in the past. So it's for anyone who's had experience of domestic abuse. And what happened is a group of experts came together to create a programme that really explores the tactics, the effects and the impact of domestic abuse, as well as looking at rebuilding some of what was lost in the process of that abusive relationship. So we started in 2017 with the Phoenix Collaborators Group, which was Oasis Domestic Abuse Service, Home Start Shepway, Choices Domestic Abuse Service, New Leaf Support, Rising Sun, and the Domestic Abuse Coordinators from Ashford Borough Council. We all came together to design a programme that was just a little bit different to what had gone before. So we'd identified a need for something that was updated. So we really wanted it to be inclusive. And I think for us, that meant that we weren't just looking at domestic abuse where there is a male perpetrator and a female victim in a romantic relationship. You know, because we all know that domestic abuse actually covers a much wider variety of relationships than that. So it was looking at sort of setting aside that really heteronormative language, as well as thinking about domestic abuse in other types of relationships, so within familial relationships as well, and also thinking about the sort of the dynamics in caring relationships. So we wanted it to be inclusive. We were also really concerned that Phoenix was practical. So we wanted people to be able to go away with some real skills. And one of the first ways that we did this was making sure that we really included safety planning as a main portion of the programme. So that's week 2. We all sort of sit together for 2 hours looking at safety planning as a key skill. But it was also about making sure that we include lots of different learning styles. So quite often programs before have been just very conversational. They've been call and answer all of the time. And we wanted to make sure that, there are lots of different opportunities for people who had different learning styles. So we wanted things that were practical activities that we could get together and do, whether, that's sort of building things, making things, drawing things. We wanted to have that included. We wanted to make sure that Phoenix was social. So we've got these 2-hour sessions. And at the beginning of every session, we've got a bit of a catch-up. So you've got that sort of 10 to 15 minutes of catch-up time where we talk about the self-care. So we've got a self-care activity that we do at the end of every session. But then it means that we can come back into the next session and sort of catch up with, well, what did we do for self-care during the week? And that's a really important thing, because one of the reasons that group work is so important and so integral is actually it means maybe for the first time you're not feeling alone in your experiences. You're sat in a room with people who've had a similar experience, and so you don't feel alone for the first time. So having the sort of time built in to build those social networks was really important as well. The other thing we wanted to do was make sure we were positive. So societally, domestic abuse is quite often, there's a very victim blaming mentality that goes on. And actually, victims of domestic abuse have gone through something that is incredibly hard for a really long time, often with very little support until a last portion of this abusive situation, and have incredible resilience. And that's just not recognised very often. So the fact that we are being consistently positive was really important as well. And then there's caring. So I've already spoken a little bit about the self-care aspect. And I think that really carries through for the facilitators of the programme as well. When you've got this sort of focus on self-care that runs through the programme, what you're able to do is really notice and take on board what's going through for all the participants. And you're able to build in that caring nature as well. So that's, we wanted to make Phoenix a little bit different. And that's sort of those sort of guiding principles that we had in the beginning. So what makes Phoenix different is really, for me, it's about the content. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to run through each of the weeks and what we do in each of the weeks, because I really do think that it's the sort of the breadth of the content that we go through that means Phoenix is as useful as it is. So with Phoenix, we start with a pre-session. So it's a 10-week program, but that's a little bit of a cheat because really there are 11 weeks because we've got this quite bulky pre-session, which can be done over the phone, or it can be done with a sort of a drop-in session. And really that's about sort of imparting lots of practical information. So, when is the course? What's it going to be? All of that sort of thing. It's also about those safety questions. So you've got to be, making sure that someone is in the right place to be able to access this program. So if it's an in-person program, where's it going to be? How are you going to get there? Are there people that are going to know where you're going? What's the story around what you're doing when you're getting to the venue? And if it's an online one, have you got a safe device? Have you got a safe, quiet room that you can go to be doing the program? So all the safety questions are really important. And it's also about creating rapport, because it can be really, really nerve-wracking to go into a room with strangers and think that, someone's going to force you to share your story or whatever that might be. It can be really, really nerve-wracking. So creating a little bit of rapport, alleviating nerves, really important. So if I'm ever doing these first calls, it's always about, is there anything you're nervous about? Can we talk about what you're nervous about? And it's always going to be that, I'm never going to force you to do any public speaking. People don't like public speaking. I'm never going to force you to do a role play. And the other thing that I always find really important is that I let them know what cake I'm going to be bringing. If it's an in-person session, what's the cake I'm going to bring? Usually a chocolate cake for the first one. And then we can all discuss for session 1, what's the snack we're going to want to bring for the next one. So that sort of pre-session is really important, just for sort of laying the sort of groundwork. If you're doing it online, you're also going to do the confidentiality in that pre-session. But when you get into the room for the first time, whether that's a virtual room or a physical room, you're going to be doing an icebreaker. There's lots of different options. So Phoenix facilitators get a really hefty toolkit, and there are lots of different options in there for what icebreakers you can do. But I love a 1 minute miracle. So you're drawing a portrait of someone, but it's not about your artistic skill, because you've got a big felt tip pen. You're not allowed to look down at what you're drawing, and you're not allowed to take your pen off the paper. So it's just a hilarious little drawing that gets created. Usually quite insulting. It usually looks pretty rubbish. We then move on to creating the group rules. So these are really important, that they're coming from the participants. So what do they want the group to be? What's going to be important for them? And then we can, as a facilitator, you can sort of guide what's going to be in those group rules. So you're going to be wanting to think about that sort of safety implications. If I see you out and about, what's going to happen? If phones go off, what are we going to do? But you create those group rules together, and then you can keep coming back to those as the program runs on. We also look at unrealistic expectations. So unrealistic expectations is where we start to sort of draw into what is domestic abuse, and it's sort of that hook for why do you want to keep coming back to these sessions? So in relationships, we'll all have expectations. You're in a new relationship. What do you think you might want? It might be, I expect that we're going to be able to spend some time together, maybe every week. I expect we'll be able to spend time together every week. I expect that I'll meet your friends. I expect all sorts of things. But these really reasonable, realistic expectations in an abusive relationship are unrealistic. I expect that I will spend all of my time with you. I expect that you will never actually see your friends, or that I will now have control over the friendship group. So those expectations get turned on their head, and they then become an excuse for abuse. So it's looking at those unrealistic expectations. And then our hopes, fears, and expectations for the program. And I think as a facilitator of this program, it's really important that you're able to share your hopes and fears as well. So it might be, oh gosh, this is the first one I've run in ages, or it's the first online one I've run, and I'm really nervous, but I'm hoping this and I'm expecting this. And you're all on an even playing field. So it's not that you're sort of teaching and leading a group. You're really sort of just facilitating conversations and activities. So week 2 then is about safety planning. So safety planning is about how we can make choices and use different tools to stay safe. So we've got a really big totem board, and you've got different areas of your life, and you can identify the risks in all of those areas, and then think about taking steps to make the risks less risky. One of the things that's so important with this is, again, you're facilitating. You are not going to have to put many safety planning activities in this, because actually the people that are in the room are complete experts in safety planning. They've been safety planning for a very long time. And personally, I always learn a couple of new things in these sessions. And it's a lovely conversational one to start with, because you're building this rapport in the group. The other thing that's really important with this one is that you're able then to talk about the fact that everyone has got different experiences, and no two safety plans are the same. And actually we use different pens. So you'll have a red pen for this and a green pen for that. And it'll be a red pen for, you're out of the relationship now. So how does the safety planning change out of a relationship? Or you're not in that same abusive situation anymore if it's a familial relationship. Or the green pen, you're still in. And so what are the different safety plans that you'll have there? And with that, it's just about acknowledging that every situation is different, and you are going to be the expert in your own situation. And so we can really have good discussions about unintended consequences as well. So when it's something that you think might be a great safety planning activity, but actually, in the end, the perpetrator is then confronted with this, it's going to force a different action, and it's actually going to make you less safe. So when we get into week 3, weeks 3, 4 and 5, actually, we're looking at, even though everyone's experience of abuse will be different, that there are some really common themes, and that most abusive people use a combination of tactics to bully, belittle and trap someone in a situation or relationship. And so it's then really exploring the fact that, you've got the power and control right in the middle. And that is the ultimate aim of all of these bully and belittle and trapping tactics. So for bullies is the use of coercion, force or threats to dominate or intimidate another person. So in terms of a relationship, you're thinking, we can absolutely all have different arguments, we can all disagree, but having that sort of bullying dynamic in the relationship is very, very different. So the bully uses a difference in power, whether that's physical or social, to exert control in the situation. They'll then repeat that behaviour again and again, and it's not equal. You are not allowed to behave in the same way. So if you're familiar with the power and control wheel, we hand out these power and control wheels, and the bully looks at 3 different sections of that. So that is privilege, coercion and threat, and minimising, denying and blaming. So in that all comes in to the bullying tactics. Oh no, sorry, it's intimidation. It's not minimising, that's belittles. So you'll look at those 3 sections of the wheel and really think about what are the different tactics that have been used. And you'll pull out lots of different examples. And again, you barely need to say anything in these. You're there with your whiteboard pen, writing down as many as quick, and they come out quick and fast. All of these different tactics. One of the other things that was really important with Phoenix is actually we didn't want to have to force people to sort of look inwards and investigate their own sort of experiences. So it doesn't ever have to be that you're sharing something about yourself or, with me, this happened, with me, that happened. It can always be, this could be a way, this could be a bullying tactic. So it doesn't ever have to be personal. So then you've got belittles. So an abusive person will also try and make you feel small and worthless. And that's another way that they're going to gain this power and control, which is at the centre of domestic abuse. So they do this by using emotional abuse, sexual abuse, and by minimising, denying what's happening. So it's any behaviour that literally makes someone feel small and unimportant. And that can be quite a difficult one. And I think when we're looking at minimising and denying, that sort of gaslighting comes into that as well. So these behaviours where you're going, oh no, that didn't happen. You're making someone question their own reality, also comes into this belittling behaviour. And then we've got trapped. And when we talk about being trapped, it could be physically trapped. You might be physically trapped in place. You might be really isolated, locked in a home, but it could also be a structure of things that aren't physical at all, but make it very difficult to leave a situation. So if we're thinking about financial abuse, it might be very, very difficult to leave a situation if you've, say, got really big rent arrears, or you've got lots of debt that's been run up in your name, or you don't have access to any cash. It can then be really very difficult to extract yourself from that situation. So in that sort of sense, you've got that sort of, it's not maybe that direct abuse, but those things are put in place really, really effectively to make it difficult to leave. You've also got using children and dependents. So those things around guilt and sort of threats around what's going to happen if you leave, and also making it just very difficult to leave, are important there. And the dependents came into it. So rather than just thinking about children, we had someone in one of the Phoenix pilots who was talking about a disabled relative that she absolutely couldn't leave. And the perpetrator knew that she would never be able to leave this person. So they were really used as a tactic of abuse to mean that you can't leave me because this is the house that's got all the adaptions for your disabled relative. And you've got isolating you. So again, with isolating you, it's removing those support structures from around you. And it might be that you physically can't contact people, you don't have a phone, you don't have credit, all of these things. But it might also be sort of putting barriers in place for those relationships. So sort of picking fights with family members, meaning you can't really contact them, you can't tell them what's going on for you, also is a really effective way of trapping you in that relationship. So what we do is we go through and we really pull out all of those tactics. So on one side of the board, we've got all of the tactics, and then on the other side, we've got the effect. So when this person is doing all of these things that have got the absolute purpose of bullying, belittling, trapping to keep that power and control, what effect does this have on us? And it's amazing the things that sort of come up again and again in the effect, confused, tired, angry, guilty, really an awful lot of these effects. And again, it sort of forces us to step away from this, I've reacted in the wrong way sort of situation, and that sort of victim blaming mentality that's so prevalent in society. It sort of forces us to go, well, that's absolutely the effect it was meant to have. These abusive behaviours have caused these effects. So it's a really good way of looking at what's happened and why it's happened. So in session 6, we start to look at the honeymoon cycle. So the honeymoon cycle is the idea that there are cyclical phases of really loving behaviours that are then designed to draw us into and keep us in abusive situations. It can be a really incredibly difficult week for people. It can be a light bulb moment, because what we're actually asking people to do is reassess the relationship. Because actually all of the really loving behaviours that happen at the beginning of the relationship, but also, as you've moved through tension and into explosion and then back into honeymoon, it's then asking us to reevaluate those as actually the loving behaviours were abusive as well. And they had the purpose of maintaining power and control, which can be really difficult. So the honeymoon cycle is looking at an abusive person who's using charm and persuasion first to sort of gain that relationship. So quite a lot of grooming behaviours and quite a lot of love bombing. So one of the warning signs might be quite an intense relationship at the beginning and sort of quite quickly moving through those relationship stages. And then it's the tension building. So once we've had that sort of period of really loving behaviour, lots of gifts and all of that sort of thing, lots of compliments, you move through into the tension building, which might happen in any relationship. You have this honeymoon phase and you can't maintain that forever. But, in the abusive relationship, we get into quite a period of quite intense tension building. The verbal and emotional abuse might start. And that's where this sort of term of walking on eggshells comes in. You've got that sense of growing danger. And of course, that sense of growing danger is because we know that there's going to be an explosion. And that explosion is the peak of the abuse. And then once you've had that peak of the abuse, that's the point at which an abusive person might think, oh no, I'm going to lose this person. I've got put an awful lot into this relationship, and I'm going to lose that person, and I need to maintain my power and control. I need to maintain my relationship with this person. And so we move straight into the honeymoon again. So then we're using remorse, we're increasing intimacy, we're making promises, and we're blaming the abuse or denying the abuse on other things. We're glossing over the abuse. So that's where that sort of gaslighting comes in as well. It wasn't as bad as you remember it. You're misremembering that. It didn't happen like that. And so that's very difficult then, because that does have the purpose of keeping you in the relationship and destabilizing you at a point where you might be thinking, actually, this is now the stage at which I want to leave. You're now into the lovely part of the relationship again, and then bound in the tension building. So that can be really, really difficult. And there's also something that we quite often see within the groups is that people say, oh, but I was just as bad. I've done bad things as well. And I think quite often when we look at this honeymoon and tension building and explosion, the pushing the buttons, you say, oh, I knew that would force an incident. I knew it would, and I did it anyway. And that's sort of really feeling quite confused at your own actions. Well, actually, the tension building was horrible. It was an awful period, and you just want that to end. So you're going to push that button and you're going to force the explosion, because then at least you know you're going to get back into the honeymoon for a while. And that's so much nicer. And we'd rather have that than the tension building. So that can be a light bulb moment as well. At the end of our honeymoon session, we look at the warning signs. So there are 9 warning signs that we've come up with as a warning signs for an abusive relationship or an unhealthy relationship. So intensity, jealousy, control, isolation, criticism, sabotage, blame, anger, and their history. So we'll give out a handout with all of those warning signs, and we ask people to create a bad romance. So again, this isn't about looking at our own relationships. It's about thinking about and understanding and helping us create a way to remember what these warning signs are. So we create a bad romance. So we might rewrite Snow White. What should Snow White be looking out for in terms of the intensity and the isolation and the history with the dwarfs? We do session 7, which is an impact on children. So thinking about how abusive people behave towards children. Because as a parent, there will be some of those things about the bullying and belittling and trapping behaviours that also impact the children. And also about how abuse affects the victim's parenting. So if you are always forced into particular roles, so quite often maybe the perpetrator is always the good cop. You know, they're doing that sort of intensity warning sign thing, and they're love bombing and big presents and all of that sort of thing. And actually it's forcing you always to be bad cop. Or it's just, you know, well, what's the effect on us with all these bullying, belittling trapping tactics? Well, actually, it's that we're confused and we're tired and we just don't have that sort of parental capacity that we want to have, because it's a bloody difficult job anyway. So what effect does that have? And then what roles do children assume? And actually, we would always really, really encourage people, no matter whether they've got children or not, to come to this session, because actually it means that you become that domestic abuse expert. And it also is a way of assessing your own childhoods. You know, were you always the perfect child? So, you know, you are, as a child, perceiving that one of your behaviours is prompting a domestic abuse incident, and therefore you're going to excel in that area. You're always going to get the good grades, or you're going to try and disappear into the background, or maybe it's the scapegoat, or maybe you're the abuser's assistant. So there are lots of different roles. We then use Maslow's hierarchy of needs to have a look at what children need to thrive, look at how domestic abuse affects all of those areas, and then what we need to do to restore the pyramid. So again, we're positive, because actually people have done the very best they can do on that given day to be the best parent they can in a very, very difficult situation. So we're being positive, we're looking at the effects, but we're also looking at how we restore all of those things. Session 8 is looking at boundaries, and it's my absolute favourite session because domestic abuse has a really massive impact on your boundaries. So you can learn that your needs aren't important. You can learn that it can be dangerous to assert yourself. You learn to put someone else's needs above your own. It isolates us and removes us from support. So actually, when we are starting to get into those new relationships again, whether that's new friendships, new romantic relationships, we're starting to, you know, talk to our family and friends again. Actually, because we are then so desperate for that love and support that we haven't had, we might be almost in that situation where we feel like we can't ever say no, because we're so desperate to have those people back. So we explore what boundaries are and techniques for implementing them. And we look at lots of scenarios for saying yes and no, because actually saying yes and no have positives and negatives to both of them. So we look at where your boundaries as a victim of domestic abuse might become quite porous. So we let everyone in, or actually where you become really, really rigid in your boundaries and you don't want to let anyone in at all because you don't want to be hurt. And then in the middle, having those healthy boundaries. So it's a really interesting session. And it's one where we don't talk about domestic abuse almost at all. We have that little bit of the introduction, but looking at those boundaries is fascinating, and quite often we're just talking about in friendships and family. And then we've got session 9, which is building a healthy relationship. And to do that, because you can quite often find a person you might want to have a relationship with, and that could be friendship, it could be intimate relationship, it could be, you know, a reaffirming relationship with a sibling. But actually there are building blocks to having those relationships, with the foundation being communication. And you find the person, but you don't find the relationship. You've got to work on the relationship. That's the thing that happens between two people. So we look at, in each of these blocks, what are the things that you want? How are you going to get those things? So what are the actions that we do to create those things? And what's the evidence then that we've got them? So what does it look like? And actually the realization from this is very often that you can't do it on your own. There is no way to have a healthy relationship where there's just one person putting in the work. But again, it's not necessarily about intimate relationships. It's not necessarily about those romantic relationships. So I've skipped out session 10. Session 10 is really looking at the previous 9 sessions. What have we learned? What do we want? But it's also about what have we learned from Phoenix, and therefore what do we want to keep going? So it can be a little bit of goal setting as well. So if what you've really enjoyed about Phoenix is that chance to be social, then how is it that you're going to keep having something social every week to be going on with? If what it has been learning, well, brilliant. How are we going to keep getting learning into your life? So we set a little bit of goals from there as well. In terms of how it works, all of the lists for how to refer for participants are held locally, but you can go to the Phoenix Group's website to have a little look at making referrals if that's a program that you think you might want to do. And then for facilitators, you've got to be a licensed facilitator, so you've got to be trained, but you can also express interest for that through the website. So I just want to end on this sort of thought of self-care, because it runs through all of the sessions, and I think it is one of the things that makes Phoenix really special, is that we spend so much time on thinking about, actually, you are important, and therefore how do we look after you, and how do we all look after ourselves? Because self-care is that thing that we do that is out of the ordinary, just to look after yourself, and that's the only purpose of it, is that it's to look after yourself. And quite often self-care can be sort of painted as you know, this sort of unachievable goal. You know, it's all, you know, wellness journals and gratitude lists and all sorts of things that actually might not suit you. But actually there are lots of different things that you can do in terms of physically, mentally, and for that sort of spiritual side as well. And also things that are very small or a little bit bigger. So we look at that Maslow's hierarchy of needs 3 times throughout the Phoenix program. And actually, for some people, you've got at the bottom those sort of physiological needs. So those will be, you know, the very basic needs. And sometimes that's where we need our self-care. We can't always be at the top of your hierarchy of needs pyramid, which is your self-actualization. So it really changes depending on where you are. I think, you know, from week to week it changes. So one of the examples of self-care might be, you know, I've been to the gym 3 times this week. Well, that's brilliant. And that's sometimes what you need. But it's not always what you need. Sometimes what you need is to have a lie-in. You know, sometimes you need that rest and relaxation, not that sort of focus on body and exercise. So it's really about listening to your body. So I would really prompt people, if they can, to do something that is very, especially just to look after yourself this week. I think Aston is trying to pop in. I wonder if you're having internet problems, Aston. I'm going to start with the Q&A. So I can see that Annie, you've got what the difference is between the Freedom Programme and Phoenix. I think that's a brilliant question. I think the Freedom Programme looks at lots of different. Hey, Aston.
Hello. Sorry.
Hello. The Freedom Programme looks at quite a lot of the sort of tactics of domestic abuse, but it doesn't necessarily cover some of the other things that we do. And it's also quite heteronormative. You know, it's always a female victim and a male perpetrator. And it's a little bit more one-dimensional in terms of the activities that we do. So it doesn't cover safety planning. It doesn't cover boundaries. The healthy relationship at the end is quite often something that maybe is not as realistic. It doesn't look at different types of domestic abuse. So it's, you know, it's looking at that intimate relationship, that romantic relationship, rather than having a broader view. So for me, Phoenix is just, you know, Freedom has been an absolutely fantastic thing, but Phoenix has just brought it forward and modernised it and added so much more.
Thank you. We've got a question from Kelly, which is, are there any training sessions for professionals? And also, is there a male course?
Another brilliant question. So in terms of for professionals, we've got the training courses to become a licensed facilitator. So we usually run one of those about once a year. So as I said, Phoenix started in 2017. We ran 2 last year. We've just finished running another one this year. So I believe we've got something like 60 trained facilitators within Kent at the moment, which is absolutely brilliant. I don't know if we've got a plan yet for when the next one will be held. But if you go to the website, the Phoenix Group's website, you will be able to sign up for that training. For the male victims course, we are actually piloting a male course at the moment. So we're working with Dads Unlimited. We're getting together a slightly adapted toolkit, but because all of these things, it was written without that gendered language, without that heteronormative language, and because actually all of the things that are brought up in the room are brought up by the participants themselves. It's been quite a light touch review. So it's been really interesting to look at that, and we're about to start doing the pilot for that. So that's really exciting. And hopefully once that pilot is done, we can start a proper rollout across Kent. And it's been brilliant actually, because in terms of sort of taking the 2020 as an opportunity rather than a setback, the idea of being able to run groups online is opening it up to a lot of different groups. So we might not have had the number of men we needed to run a group in Margate or in Ashford. But actually, if we go across to the whole of Kent, actually we can run a couple of groups a year for men and do it online. So I think it's a real benefit.
Thank you. Daisy has asked, actually I've had a couple of questions about this. How can we refer people onto the Phoenix project and who's eligible for it?
I don't think there's particularly eligibility criteria. I mean, at the moment, it's women because we're just piloting this for men. So we will get that up and running for men's lists as well. But if you go to the Phoenix Group's website, which is, I think, phoenixgroups.uk, then you will find on there a complete list of, for each area, how you refer in to each of those 12 districts in Kent.
Lovely, thank you. Adam has made a comment that they use Maslow through the lens of a child for the 5 steps co-parenting program, and he quite likes the fact that everything's coming together, which is actually really positive because we're sort of covering the board. So that's great.
Really positive, and I love using that Maslow's, and I like sort of tying it through the whole program because actually we introduce it first in terms of self-care. So, you know, where am I this week with my self-care? If I'm absolutely bloody exhausted, there's no way I'm up the top for self-actualization. I'm not doing my wellness journal this week, and I'm not going to the gym every day, and I'm not doing all of this sort of thing. Actually, I need to take myself down to the first level and make sure I'm getting enough sleep and I'm getting enough healthy food and I'm having the chance to just breathe. So it's those sort of sections. And then you can sort of build up. So actually drawing it through the whole course, I think gives people a lot of skills in terms of sort of going forward with their life and their self-care, and also thinking about what their children need. You know, or there's a massive tantrum. Well, where are we on this needs? Actually, we're right down at the bottom. You're bloody exhausted. The child's exhausted.
Absolutely. Emma is, so she's already a freedom trained facilitator, and she's wondering if it's okay to still use that information because she's not quite sure if she'll be trained as Phoenix.
So you absolutely, it's decided in each area about what program you run, and I think different areas and different organisations will run different programs. It's worth noting that the Phoenix Collaborators Group, we've designed this in part because we want to make it incredibly cheap for people to run in Kent. We're not going to charge anyone anything to train. So the training is 3 days of training that we deliver for free, because actually we want as many people to do this as possible. And it's absolutely not to say that freedom doesn't still have massive value. It does. It's been an absolutely brilliant programme for a very long time. It's just that it hasn't been updated in a very long time as well. If you do start to use Phoenix, you've then got a license, and actually you can't then start changing and chopping and changing it around and using a bit of this and a bit of that to make your own program. If you're using Phoenix and you're a Phoenix facilitator, it's sort of using this program, and that's partly because we want to keep all of the learning together. So when we're making all of these adaptations, we want to be sort of having this program for Kent that we're all using it in the same way. And if you've got a brilliant idea of how we need to do this activity or that activity, you need to feed it back into the group as a whole. So absolutely still use it. But if you're going to be using Phoenix, it's a Phoenix as a whole program.
That leads quite nicely on to Emma's next question, which is Freedom still running across Kent, or has it been completely replaced by Phoenix?
It hasn't been completely replaced. I think there's been quite a good uptake for Phoenix. So that I know in Thanet and Dover, we haven't run Freedom in a little while, and I don't think we're planning to. I think we plan to just run with Phoenix, and that's the same in Medway and for Dartford and Gravesham as well. But again, there are lots and lots of different organisations that run groups, and there isn't sort of one sort of way of doing it. So yeah.
Lovely. Libby's asked, can people only join once they're out of that abusive relationship?
Nope. Come on in. Very inclusive. So we don't want to shut absolutely anyone out of this. And it's really clear we're in the group, and we've got, you know, sort of 10 people sitting around the table learning about domestic abuse and the tactics and the effects, that we're all in a different place. And there's never a judgment about being in a different place. And there's this sort of quite paternalistic thing where we think, oh, we should be out of that relationship. Actually, that's for that person to decide. That's not for me to decide. And if what we're doing is giving a lot of self-care techniques and some safety planning techniques and a sort of good insight into what this domestic abuse is, that's a brilliant thing. And we don't then necessarily need to be pushing for any one outcome for that person. They are the expert in their situation, in their life.
Lovely. Udine has asked, are these closed, open or rolling groups currently?
So they are, I don't know really what the terminology about the closed and open and rolling. It's not a rolling group. So we have sort of set start dates. I know we've got 5, I think, starting in the next quarter for Thanet and Dover. So there's lots and lots of different things. And it's been really difficult going through the pandemic because actually this group work really stopped for about 6 months, which was a massive loss. So we're getting people back into these, but we don't do them rolling, because partly because of that social thing where you really get a cohesive group that are forming together and do this program together is quite nice.
Lovely, thank you. Georgina's asked, where do these physical programs take place in Kent?
At an absolute hodgepodge of places. And again, it really depends who's delivering them. So Aston and I have run programs together, and we've run programs in a couple of different places. But we've run them in adult education centres, in church halls, in community centres, in children's centres. So there are lots of different places. And actually, I think that's quite an important thing, because people feel comfortable in different places. So a children's centre is not going to be appropriate for everyone. If you don't have access to your children anymore, if you don't have children, if you're a male person going into a group, actually it doesn't feel particularly natural for you to walk into a children's centre then to be going to this group. And actually it might feel a bit strange, you know, why were you going to that children's centre? You might get more questions about that than you would otherwise. So having that sort of array of different spaces is really important.
Lovely.
But we do beg, borrow and steal venues.
You do. Libby has asked, do you need any prior qualifications for training to be a facilitator?
You don't actually. So it's not necessarily that you've got to work within domestic abuse or within that sort of sector. It's also not necessarily that you've had to have experienced domestic abuse before. But we would probably ask that you have a good sort of knowledge either around group working or around domestic abuse. But it's not necessarily, it's sort of a case-by-case basis. So don't let that put you off from applying to be a facilitator.
And going along the sort of facilitators route, Margaret would like to know, how much of your own personal experience do you embed into sessions to reduce sort of hierarchy?
It's really an interesting question, because there's part of it we say, well, actually, we're all equals in the room and we want to be sharing things and creating that wonderful atmosphere. But actually, you've got to have really good boundaries as a facilitator. This isn't about me. And I don't need to be burdening the group with all of my stories. So it might be wonderful to share bits and bobs of my story. But actually, you know, you don't want that to be taking over the room. So it's got to be quite a careful boundary between what you share of yourself and what you don't. So I know for me, when we're looking at the sort of healthy relationship situation in that week 9 of the programme, it you know, I will say, you know, I've got, you know, this with my best friend and this with this person, and in my new relationship over here we've got this, and actually that's wonderful as long as it's in quite a boundaried way. So it's a tricky one.
So staying along the line of sort of facilitators, Rebecca's asked if you think it would be beneficial for police officers to be trained so that they can direct referrals.
Absolutely. And we've got several police officers who have been trained in the most recent batch of Phoenix facilitators, and I think it is a really brilliant thing. It's you know, it's another string to the bow. It's another way of getting sort of police involved, and clients and participants are sort of having a different view of police and their sort of role within the community. It's an absolutely brilliant thing. I really like to have a wide variety of different professionals that are able to facilitate Phoenix. And it's also because Phoenix, and having that sort of 3 days of training, or we did it online recently, is 6 weeks of a couple of hours a week with a lot of pre-reads and sort of video content as well. But having that is really intense domestic abuse training, actually, from a really good victim perspective. So I think it's really good training.
Thank you. Libby would like to know how much it costs.
How much it costs in order to facilitate or in order to train, I suppose, but I can answer both. In order to go onto the training, completely free. So we go out and apply for grant funding in order to train people or do it from our own charitable funds. Because we believe in Phoenix so strongly and we desperately want people to have access to this course, and we don't want to make it prohibitively expensive, because again, that's one of the things with other programs, is prohibitively expensive to get people trained to go and do that, and we want to spread this knowledge far and wide. In terms of how much it really costs to facilitate, you've got to think that you need 2 facilitators, and you need 2 facilitators for 2 hours a week for 10 weeks on top of the admin time. So really it's a time cost, and you can sort of calculate that in terms of your own organisations.
Lovely. We've got a few questions about the children's element. Libby would like to know if Phoenix has a sort of specific programme for children, because the Freedom did have and does have.
It's an interesting one. We haven't set one up yet. So Phoenix is in its infancy, and we're looking at lots of different sort of amendments to Phoenix, and we haven't done a young person's or a children's Phoenix yet, but it's definitely been something we've spoken about. And I think it's a really interesting idea in terms of actually what parts of this would we take forward and would we want children and young people to know. Just because, you know, it's brilliant professional training, but it's also sort of really insightful as well in terms of, you know, looking at, you know, what healthy relationships should and could be, and what abusive tactics and warning signs and the honeymoon cycle. So I think it would be really good. We don't have it yet, and I don't know that we've got it planned in the near future. But if it's something you're interested in, let us know.
Thank you. John Christian has asked if you can elaborate a little bit more on how the Phoenix programme helps the child with the effects of the abuse in the child through like the participants being in that programme.
I think it's really, so if we look at the children's session, you're then looking at the roles that the children assume. And actually, quite often what professionals will hear is, you know, the children don't know, they're always in a different room, they're not affected by it, you know. And actually that's part of a coping mechanism for victims of domestic abuse. And it's a plaster that, you know, it's very hard to rip off, because obviously we don't want our children to have been affected in that way. So it is a gentle way of saying, but they have been. Absolutely, children have been and are affected by domestic abuse. So we start that session actually by saying, if you walk into a room and there has been a fight, how do you know? And we all know. We all know when things are a bit tense at home, don't we? If Aston and I had been having a fight before everyone came in, I think even online, people would have been able to tell that I was a bit knocked off. And so it's sort of that sort of understanding that actually children are affected by domestic abuse. And that's 1 in 7 children in the UK have lived with domestic abuse at some point. So that's a massive number. But even when we're saying that they are affected, it doesn't mean that there is horrible permanent damage. And that's part of the reason we go through this, what do children need to thrive? And all of the areas of the hierarchy of needs to say, well, what's been tarnished and what's been taken away entirely by domestic abuse? And so we've got different coloured pens again. We've got, you know, it's been tarnished or it's been taken away entirely. And what we're able to do then is say, actually, you know, they have been affected. And there's no way of saying they haven't been. They have been affected. All of these different things have been affected. But with love and consistency, and that we've got a love and nurture wheel and these lovely boundaries. And actually, by you being able to be in a place where you're able to do more and more parenting and more focusing on the children, because in that domestic abuse relationship, you're surviving. And once we move past just that surviving technique to sort of that thriving, actually, we can start to do more and more. So it's a really nice, gentle way in 2 hours to start unpicking that narrative of they haven't been affected, so they have been affected, so here's what we can do about it together. And at the end of that session, we've also got children's self-care. So we look at self-care and what you can do with self-care as a family as well, which is nice.
We've got a few questions now about how the course runs. So Jacqueline would like to know, is there a specific number of sort of DNAs whereby a client would then be removed from that programme?
I wouldn't have use the sort of terminology of removing them from the programme, because I just know from myself that I get chaotic and then I don't attend things even though I really want to, and you know, something might come up. But there is a point at which you say, actually, you're not going to get as much from this as you want me, as I would love you to. So shall we get you onto the next programme instead? You know, and I think if you haven't done the first 3 sessions, So if you haven't done that sort of introduction where we're sort of getting those ground rules together and we're talking about the unrealistic expectations and we're doing the confidentiality agreements and our hopes and our fears and our expectations, you haven't done safety planning. And actually then you've missed out on our first week of looking at the tactics and the effects, or you haven't done bullies. I think then you're not getting as much from this as you could do. And therefore, let's see if we can call you up and say, you know, what was it about attending? You know, was it nerves? Was it just that it was a really inappropriate time? Let's get you on a different one.
Lovely.
Or you don't have to attend. I can't force you. You might not want to. You might have walked in the room to one look at me and thought, nah, and that's all right.
So that leads really nicely on to my next question, actually, from Libby, which says, can somebody do the programme more than once? For example, if they don't get along with the previous group or their facilitator?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, we do have people who come more than once. So it might be you come when you're in the relationship and you're able to get some things from it. And then actually you come out of that relationship and you think, actually, I've now got sort of more time and space to be able to really delve into these things. And I think I'd get a lot more from it and I'll go again. But we've also had a situation, you know, where someone's walked in and they've got their neighbour in the room and they don't want to do it with their neighbour in the room. So, yeah, we can do another one. It's fine.
Emma would like to know what the maximum number is for participation.
So it's really interesting. I think online and in person would be different. And I think it also depends on what sort of room you've got available. So what room we've begged, borrowed or stolen to facilitate this in, because you want to have a comfortable environment. And if you're doing it in person, I want to be able to make everyone a cup of tea or coffee. And therefore, how many cups of tea and coffee can I make in that sort of 10 to 15 minute self-care section at the beginning before we move on? I would normally invite about 20 people, and we'd probably have about 15 people show up. For the online, I'd probably invite about 12, and we'd maybe have about 8, because I think you need to be able to manage it slightly differently online.
Suzanne has asked about online participation and what the effects are of this, and have we had any participants yet that have experienced both and can sort of give us some feedback on that?
No, we have not. We have just finished adapting the handbook. So there's going to be a handbook that's sent out to all the participants so that they can do the activities as we go along, because we didn't want to lose that practical element of where we're making and doing things together. So we send out this handbook and the pencils, but we've really only just finished adapting it and training people. So I think the first groups are going to now be starting. I think we've maybe had one group start, but we haven't yet had the feedback from that group. But most of the groups are now starting in January. So I am going to be absolutely fascinated to find out, because I think there are going to be some massive, massive benefits from doing online groups. You know, if you've got mobility issues, if you're in a really rural area, you know, it's dark, it's dank, no one wants to go out on a Tuesday evening at 7 o'clock and it's January, it's dark, it's horrible. So there are some real benefits, but it remains to be seen how we're able to build that group dynamic online. I think it'd be fine. I love training online. I think it'd be fine. Other people think, you know, it's going to be much more difficult. And I am an endless optimist, and that's not necessarily always the way life goes.
Thank you. So in line with that, Vita would like to know, are we still offering any face-to-face training at this point in time?
Not at this point in time, at least in Thanet and Dover. We've made the decision that actually, because we're possibly, you know, going in and out of different lockdowns, in Thanet we've got incredibly high rates of infection at the moment, so we don't think it's responsible actually to be asking people to come in for a 10-week program where we're maybe going to have to then make it online in the long term anyway. But we don't know how long that's going to go on for. So I think we've got that for the next quarter, and then we'll review it after the next quarter. Because it's really important that we have both. Because for some people, online is going to be brilliant, and so for some people, it's not appropriate at all. I think if you're still in that relationship with someone who's being really abusive and you're living in the same home, you can't do an online Phoenix. It's just not appropriate. It's not safe. So for that sort of situation, you've got to then have online. And it might be that you just don't feel comfortable. with an online group, and that's fine. So we've got to have both, but for the next quarter, we're going to go online only.
Lovely. Chloe's asked, actually, if somebody is still in an abusive relationship, how do we manage the safety aspect of that?
It's really difficult. But if you are looking at sort of safety planning, I would say that Tina Alexander did a brilliant session on dynamic safety planning earlier in the conference. So you should be able to access that. But also link in with your local domestic abuse services. If you're ever worried about safety planning with a client, link in with your local services, because they will be absolutely so happy to help you, either just help you talk through what a safety plan could be, or to help you make a referral for that client. But just to be really aware of the unintended consequences. So what might seem like a brilliant idea for safety planning for you could actually have unintended, more dangerous consequences for the person. So to be led by that person.
Thank you. We've got a couple of questions about whether facilitators could be male or female.
Yeah, I think they could be male or female. And I think it's going to be really interesting when we're looking at the male group as to whether they are going to be all male facilitators or a male-female group. At the moment, we're having our female Phoenixes just run by women. But in the most recent facilitators training, we've had 2 men trained as well, 3 men trained as well. So it's an interesting question as we go forward. And I think it really depends on sort of testing it out and seeing how it goes. But we know from service delivery that people really appreciate having male IDVAs and male support workers. And it doesn't seem to be a problem.
Okay. Karen would like to know, if you do train to be a facilitator, how do you go about actually facilitating a Phoenix if you are not affiliated with a DA service?
So it will be about getting in contact with your local providers and usually volunteering. So you will then be a volunteer facilitator with your local provider. So it depends in which area of Kent you're in as to how you go about doing that. But if you're not doing it as part of a sort of professional group, it will be about volunteering with another organisation.
And Chloe would like to know, is this a programme that's going to be rolled out across the country?
Oh, I mean, ideas of world domination. Yes, please. At the moment, we are just doing Kent, but I think it's an absolutely brilliant programme. I would like everybody to have access to it. But at the moment, we're focusing Kent.
Lovely, thank you.
But if you are an organisation that wants to be trained, do get in contact.
There's also a couple of questions about whether or not there's any classes that sort of run concurrently with the Phoenix programme to sort of increase the effectiveness of the group work, and if there are any follow-up programmes afterwards for those groups.
We haven't designed anything that's specific in terms of Phoenix as a follow-up programme. There is the recovery toolkit that I think would work really nicely with it. I'm not a recovery facilitator. I don't know an awful lot about recovery, but those programmes could run together really nicely.
Thank you. And Libby would like to know who funds the participation in the group.
It is done really sort of on an individual basis. So each organisation will either fund it via, through that time that I was talking about, so through letting people out to go do it as part of their jobs. If it's part of a charity, we will quite often go out for grant funding to deliver a certain number of groups. So the Police and Crime Commissioner has been absolutely wonderful in funding the Phoenix programmes, so funding the original development of the programme, and then also funding the development of the online version of this programme. And with that online, 10 groups that can be run to sort of pilot this online delivery as well. But it really is, there isn't a sort of cross-Kent sort of one pot of money that we go into. It's again a beg, borrow, steal situation. And also in terms of volunteering time as well. So it's also facilitated and run by an awful lot of volunteers that we are very grateful to.
Chloe has asked if there is sort of out of session work for the facilitators to complete.
There is a sort of admin that needs to be done. So in terms of that sort of pre-session, that sort of calling up, sort of sending out the handbooks to people, and also sort of recording sort of attendance and doing the evaluation, because my other hat is to do impact and data, and so evaluating these programs is really, really important. So there's that sort of work. But in terms of, it really does sort of sit within that sort of 10-week period. And once you've done your sort of 10 weeks of 2 hours a week, probably, plus your extra half hour of shopping for your snacks and doing your little bit of admin, there's not too much.
Laura's got a question about whether or not we allow people to share sort of their own stories and experiences in the group. And how do we manage that if a person is vulnerable, or if there's any concerns for sort of shame or bullying or gossip and those sorts of things?
It's one of the most difficult things to manage as a facilitator. And it should be something that we talk about when we're looking at those group rules at the beginning. You know, we're all in a different situation, and we've all got different experiences. We're all at a different stage. And actually the fact that we don't gossip and that we're really kind to everyone else, we're kind to ourselves and we're kind to everyone else in the group, needs to be sort of that very starting ground rule. Absolutely, people can share their experiences, but again, as part of the ground rules, what we might talk about and sort of introduce is that idea of being re-traumatized. And that comes into the hopes, fears and expectations as well. Quite often is, you know, one of the things that I'm really nervous of is the fact that this is going to bring it all back up again. And actually I was doing okay, and now I think I'm going to be having flashbacks and I'm not going to be able to sleep, which is a really reasonable sort of fear of having to sort of spend some weeks sort of looking at these really difficult subjects. So being really mindful of that, but absolutely managing that group dynamic is the most difficult thing. The content is easy, the content is great, the activities are wonderful, you're there with your other facilitator, you're having a great time. It is managing your group dynamics which is the trickiest thing.
Okay. Chloe would like to know how sort of lockdown has impacted our referral numbers, and how are we sort of giving a sort of a continued care package after our programs currently?
It's really, really tricky because we just haven't been able to run programs, and yet referrals have kept coming in. And I think one of the things with the lockdowns has been that people have felt really emotionally vulnerable and really isolated. And for victims of domestic abuse, they've been sort of systematically isolated anyway. And now we've got this sort of external control and isolation that's coming in. So that has in itself been quite re-traumatizing for people. So we have had a lot of referrals coming in whilst we haven't been able to do these programs, because we didn't want to put together an online program that was shoddy. We wanted to be able to take the time to really do it properly. And at the beginning of the year, we just didn't know how long this was going to last. So is it going to be something that's worth doing? So it was put on pause. So I think it's going to be really, really important now to sort of start getting going again. In terms of what happens afterwards, again, that's a really interesting question, because we did a couple of focus groups before we started developing the content for Phoenix. And one of the things in that is it sort of, you know, I really remember quite strong someone saying, you know, it felt like I'd found my women, I'd found my girls, and we were all together. And then all of a sudden we stopped meeting and it felt awful. And actually that's what session 10 is about, is trying to put in place something so we aren't going to be meeting forever and ever. That's not realistic. And actually that's not really what people need. People don't need that dependence on a group. They need their own social networks, and they need their own way of learning and going on and sort of getting on with their lives. But to have that sort of dead stop can be really difficult, actually, when you've found a group of people that you really click with. And so that can be about, well, do you want to keep meeting? You can't keep meeting with me. I'm going to have to leave this group now because I've got professional boundaries and I can't just keep meeting people, even when I would absolutely love to. Got an absolute group of wonderful women who I would love to have a cup of tea with every week. That's not appropriate, but it's sort of trying to facilitate, well, what are you going to do to keep this going? Is it the learning? Is it the social side? What is it that you want to keep going, and how can we do that for you?
Okay, thank you. Gavin would like to know, do we offer a one-to-one version of the programme for people that maybe struggle with groups or struggle with the idea of this being an online thing at this point in time?
We have done that before, actually, on a bit of an ad hoc basis, where people really feel that they can't enter a group. And actually, sometimes it's where we feel that this person isn't going to be able to sort of practice that sort of containment that you need to for a group. So we just think that that's actually going to be unmanageable in a group situation. And we have done. We haven't done it in a sort of official basis, so I don't have like a little toolkit and a handbook and that sort of thing that I've put together that is specifically for delivering it on a one-to-one basis, but it has gone down quite well when we have done it on a one-to-one basis.
Thank you. Just becoming quite mindful of time, we've got a couple of questions about how do we host it online? So what are we using? What technology is behind that? What applications are we using to make sure that that runs smoothly?
So we've been suggesting that we use Zoom. For me, Zoom is just a little bit easier for clients to access than other platforms. Some organisations are not using Zoom. You can use Teams. I just don't think it's as user-friendly, but you can use Teams, and people are going to give that a bit of a go to learn about that. But for the most part, we've been using Zooms just because it's easy with the breakout rooms and that sort of thing.
And Libby's asked, do we encourage our participants to share their contact details sort of at the end of it?
I don't know if we encourage it, but we absolutely, it's absolutely fine. It's your choice, your personal information. And again, when we talk about that group contract, usually, do we want to be sharing our personal contact information, and how do we want to be doing that? And again, when we're then looking at the boundaries in week 8, what boundaries do we have? Are we really porous and we're giving our number out to everyone on the street because we're, desperate to have a bigger social circle? But nothing against doing it at all. And it's one of the wonderful things is actually people make really good friends during this sort of intense 10 weeks. And you wouldn't want to take away from that at all.
Lovely, thank you. And Rebecca has asked if we can post sort of the email address to register to train. Quite a lot of people are quite interested in that.
Absolutely. I will see if I can find the thing and put it in the chat now. See if I can find it while I'm on here. There it is.
Okay, thank you.
phoenixgroups.uk, and on there, I'm just going to ask a question now with that, Aston.
Lovely, thank you. And I will just publish. Oh, you published it yourself. Brilliant. We've got a question about what are our safeguarding boundaries?
It's really interesting, and I wonder what you referring to. Is that in terms of the initial referral, or whether it's something, if we hear something we're concerned about in the group? Obviously, if we hear something that we're concerned about and we think this is a safeguarding referral that we need to make, that is absolutely, of course, we would be making that. And we make it really, really clear when we're doing our confidentiality. We don't just sort of wave it in front of them and get you to sign it. We are really going through each part of that confidentiality agreement. What are we going to do with the information? Where's it going to go? And if I hear something that means I need to safeguard you, what am I going to do with it? And then it's quite clear that if you think, I don't know if I want everyone to know this, then don't share it. So that's quite clear.
Lovely. I think we've got a bit of time for maybe a couple more questions, if that's all right by you, Iona.
That's fine by me.
Margaret would like to know, do you attend to diverse needs such as age when you're looking at the group membership?
Yeah, we don't tend to put together groups with a sort of mind having it particularly, building a diverse group, but it tends to happen naturally anyway, is that you get a really good range of people within the groups. And it's really important, again, when we look at the tactics, that we're thinking about the different tactics that are used in different stages of life. Because I think quite often older victims of domestic abuse are just forgotten about entirely, and make up a really large proportion of the people that are experiencing domestic abuse but are not reaching out to services for help, and we're not reaching out to them in the right way either. So it's a really important one. But we wouldn't necessarily be saying, right, we need to have, you know, 3 people from this age group, 3 people from this age group, and 3 people from this age group. But it is nice to have a good mix.
Okay, thank you. And Libby's asked, do we need specialist training to sort of develop it one-to-one and deliver it one-to-one?
Oh, it's a really good question. You would need to be a licensed Phoenix facilitator to deliver any Phoenix, whether that's one-to-one or not. Whether we need to develop something specifically for one-to-one delivery, I'm not sure. I think that would be one I need to go away and have a think about. But certainly you need to have had that full 3 days or 6 weeks training, however we go forward with that, in order to really understand each of the stages of Phoenix.
Lovely. And I think because of the time, one final question. How can people access the referral forms?
So those are, again, through that website that we've just put up there. You've got in there, if you go to make a referral, you've got all of the different districts in Kent. So you can go to the district that your client is in and make a referral to the right organisation through there.
Lovely, thank you.
I really hope that you do, because it's a brilliant programme.
I have to agree, it is. So we are sort of coming to the end of our time slot. So thank you very much to you, Iona. That was brilliant. I'm sure we're all going to go away with quite a few things to think about. Thank you to everybody that asked questions. Really added to the conversation that we just have. Sorry that we didn't have time to get through every single one, but we did as many as we could. A recording of this webinar is going to be made available to you all shortly, so you can keep hold of that. You can watch that again. That gives you the slides and all that information. If you have enjoyed this event, please remember that there's still time to register for the upcoming webinars, so your conference journey doesn't end here. So just simply go to www.daeverybodiesbusiness.org to register. So we've got 2 days left of events. We can also keep the conversation going with the hashtag #DAEverybodiesBusiness and hashtag #NoCSpeakOut, which is on all social media platforms. If anything in the talk today has raised anything with you personally and you'd like to find out more about services available, you can go to the www.domesticabuseservices.org website. There's also a link to our CIDAS website that's just popped up at the bottom, and a telephone number that you can call to get advice. And that is advice about all of your local services and what is available to you. So thank you everybody for attending today, and Iona, thank you again for such a lovely chat.
Oh, thanks, Aston.